When you're pregnant, people tell you a lot of different things. They tell you about the diapers, they tell you about the sleep deprivation, they even tell you about the cries. One thing no one ever tells you about is how to navigate through a stillbirth, how to navigate when the nursery is empty. What do you do then? No one ever talks about that. My name is Charlotte, and that became my reality in 1999. So on June 11th, 1999, I woke up in labor. I remember a lot about that day, but there are some things that I don't remember. I remember calling my sister and my friend, and they took me to the hospital. At this time, I was probably about 19 going on 20, and when I arrived at the hospital, I remember just feeling nauseous, and I remember being put in a wheelchair so that they could wheel me back to labor and delivery, and immediately I threw up. And I was just thinking like, okay, that's weird. I don't know if that's something that people do. So I was wheeled back to labor and delivery. At that time, I was placed on the hospital bed. I was placed in a position where they could put the monitor on my belly so that they can monitor the baby's heartbeat before I actually delivered. And the nurse placed a monitor on my stomach, and then she stepped away. A different nurse came in, she adjusted the monitor, and she stepped away. Then both nurses came in with the doctor, and the doctor adjusted the monitor on my stomach. He just was quiet for a moment, and in my head I'm just thinking like, what's going on? Like, why are they not saying anything? Like, something has to be wrong. And I just immediately knew something was wrong. And then the doctor said, I'm sorry, but there's no water around the baby and there is no heartbeat. And in that moment, I was trying to process what he was saying, and I was like, so there's nothing you can do? Like, can you help him? Like, is there anything that, what do we need to do, you know? And he said, no. He said, there's nothing I can do. I'm sorry. He said, you know, we'll have to deliver the baby in a few minutes. And then the next thing I remember is I was pushing to deliver the baby. I do remember having Demerol and the epidural, and I do remember being really cold because of the Demerol and just like shivering. I remember signing some papers, and I was just like shaking the whole time because it was just so cold in there. And I remember a crowd of people like off to the side, and they just seemed so far away. You know, it was almost like in one of those movies where, you know, like you're like taken aback, and then something that you're looking at that's scary, it's way over there or something. And I just was like trying to process everything. Like, I remember my sister being there and some family members, but I don't remember everyone that was there. And I just remember them being there sad. I don't know if they were crying. I think they were, but I don't know. Like, I was just so in shock, and everything was just so surreal at that moment. Like, I wasn't comprehending what was really happening, you know. It just didn't seem real. At some points, I don't even remember being able to hear certain things. Like, it just was silent, you know. And I remember the doctor asking if I wanted to hold the baby, and I said yes. And I held him, and he was wrapped in a blanket, and I unwrapped the blanket so that I could see if he had 10 fingers, 10 toes, you know, did he have my eyes, my green eyes, or did he have brown eyes, you know, what his hair looked like. And, you know, I just wanted to see him and just kind of like take that in. And we did name him. His name was Trajan. He was named after a basketball player. I was a Duke college basketball player fan, and he was named Trajan. His middle name was Dominic, and his last name is Warrior. And so at that moment, after, you know, holding him, I remember his little face and his little skin was very like paper thin. And I remember like there was a little hole right here, not a hole, but like a tear in the skin. So you could see like the flesh underneath the skin because it was just so tender and so like sensitive. And I remember just, you know, giving him a kiss on the forehead and just telling him I loved him. And the doctor asked us if we wanted to do an autopsy, and we both agreed no, we didn't want to do that. Like, he had been through something that we didn't even know, and we don't know, like, was he in pain or what, and we just didn't want to, you know, put him in any more agony. Even though he was gone, I just didn't want to have to do that, you know. So I couldn't wrap my mind around doing that, so we didn't. Which down the line, it kind of was questioned, you know, like, why would that have happened? But moving on, I'll get to that maybe in another video. But yeah, after that, they took him. And when they took him, that was the hardest thing. That was the hardest thing because it was like letting go and knowing that I was never going to see him again. It was like the final, you know, moment. And I just knew that I couldn't take him home. There's nothing that I could do. And he was just gone. And then thinking about him being in that room, wherever they had him, you know, was he cold? You know, like what? It was just some room, you know, it wasn't in my arms or in my home, you know, and so that was a really hard thing for me to think about. And that night, I was placed in a room with a woman who had a baby, and you know, I just remember hearing the baby crying, and that was just a very hard time. And they only had the little divider curtain that's very thin, so that was the only thing that separated me and this other woman and her child, you know. And there was a nurse that came on staff that night, and she was like, no, she was like, I'm not going to leave you here. I'm going to move you to a private room. She was like, I don't care what they say or what, you know, anyone thinks. You don't need to be here. You need to be by yourself in a separate room, not experiencing this. And so she moved us to another room. And that night, I just remember thinking like they were going to come into the room and say, oh, we made a mistake. You know, he's actually breathing. You know, he's fine. Was our mistake, you know. And that moment obviously never happened, and we had to go home empty-handed, you know, with an empty car seat. And that was a very long ride home, sad ride home, you know. And for when we walked into the home, we had previously had a crib there, and you know, with the little themed blue sheets, and you know, everything was all set up and ready for him to come home. And when I got home, that stuff was gone, because when I was in the hospital, the baby's father, and I think my sister and friends like removed everything because they didn't want me to come home to that. And they thought in that moment that they were protecting me, which I really appreciate because that was something that was protecting me, but it really didn't, because I had to go through that grief. Like, there was nothing that was going to stop me from going through the pain of losing my child. And so when I left the hospital, they did give me a folder, and it had a picture of my son. It was a Polaroid picture. And they gave me like a little Ziploc baggie with, some of his hair in there. And it was like almost like a birth certificate, but it wasn't. It was like a birth facts document where it had his feet prints on there, and it had his birth weight. He was 3 pounds um, at 40 weeks, which is not normal for a full-term baby to weigh that low of a weight. And also, they had like a brochure for a counselor in there, and I think that was it. And that folder over the next few weeks really became the one thing that I had to cling to, of my son. I would go in the closet and just look at that folder every day, look at the picture, look at, his feet prints, and, see the little hair and how soft it was. And, I would just cry every day. I would wake up in the mornings crying at 5 o'clock. Sometimes I couldn't even sleep. I would call my dad because he lived in another city, and he was very, very attentive. Any time of the morning that I would call, he would answer, and he would just listen to me and, tell me it would be okay. He didn't really try to give too much advice because I don't think he knew what to say, which was perfect because there's really nothing you can say other than it's going to be okay, or I'm here for you, And so I really appreciated him for being there in that time for me. And yeah, I remember, I think it was a few weeks later, I had, we had to have a funeral for him. And at that time, I knew someone who was a funeral director, and he was dating one of my friends. And he knew me throughout the pregnancy, and he actually like paid for the entire funeral. He paid for the casket, and he paid for the limo, he paid for the plot, and I think the only thing that we paid for was the headstone. And I just remember pulling up to that cemetery, and everything was just laid out, and the little casket was there, and it was just white with like gold marbling on it, and it was so cute. And I know that's kind of weird to say about a casket for a baby, but it was nice. It was, it was pretty. I had never seen a marble casket before. And, he was in there. We had bought him a cute little outfit and had stuck some toys in there with him and a little teddy bear. And I think it was a little pillow in there that said like sleep peacefully or something like that. And, we had the ceremony. My friends and some family members were there, and, we had to say our goodbyes, and we had to leave. And that was like another final, like reliving that final moment at the hospital. It was like reliving that final moment over again, where I was leaving again without him, and I was not gonna have him there. And so I had to face that reality again, and that was just so hard. That was just the hardest thing for me. And, I just continued to cry and grieve every day. I did, because I didn't understand why it happened, what made it happen. Everything was fine. I remember 2 weeks before that happened, I actually went into labor. That 2 weeks before, I had a doctor's appointment, and I was going to go to the appointment, and they called to reschedule. So the week before, I did go to the doctor, and everything was fine. Like, I had a heartbeat. Actually, let's backtrack. 2 weeks before I went into labor, they had rescheduled the appointment for the week before I went into labor. And I think I didn't make it. This is sounding confusing. But I don't think I made it to that last appointment, because I think I ended up going into labor before that appointment happened. And at that point, I remember going to my dad's house, and he had made some gumbo, and me and my sister and her friend were there, and my dad was just like rubbing my stomach, and he was kind of like shaking my stomach, and he was like talking to the baby and saying like, hey, wake up, this your grandfather or whatever. And nothing was happening. And I was just like, well, maybe he's asleep, and my dad was like shaking it in my stomach again, and then he was like, he must be sleeping. We didn't think anything of it. And now looking back at that moment, that was a red flag that I was not aware of, because nobody taught me that. I didn't know about kick counts and things like that back then, and I just thought that I had made it past that 27-week mark and I was good. 32 weeks was good, 37 weeks was good. So I was at the finish line, and so I didn't think anything of it. But hindsight is 2020. So when I look back, it's like, oh, maybe something was wrong then. Was that the time that he had passed, or what was happening at that moment? And that was my experience with stillbirth, and having to bury my first child, not knowing what happened and why it happened. A few weeks after the funeral, we did decide to go to counseling, and I remember talking about it. I don't really remember what was said, but I do remember when we left there that his father, the baby's father, was like, I'm never doing that again. So we never went back. I don't know why I didn't go back, but I did search for like resources online. And back then, if you know anything about the 90s, the internet was just coming out, so there wasn't any Google or, I think everything was like AOL. We were on dial-up, and so there were a lot of like chat rooms online. They were very like glittery, I don't even know how to say that, glittery, and they had like little cherub angels, and it was just really like a blue background, words on it. It was not really user friendly. It was just a lot of chats going on, and I really was not in the mood to read those things, so I didn't. I think I probably posted the story of my stillbirth on there, and that was it. I never went back and looked for other resources. And, it was just something that I dealt with on my own. And, that's something that I realized that, there's not a lot of resources out there for mothers um, to talk about stillbirth. There are a lot of people now going through it, and they're talking about it, and opening groups. And then there's also March of Dimes, and other places who have been out there for a while. But at that point, that was just, for me, hard to find, and it was not even worth putting in the work, because at that moment I did not feel like researching. I wasn't so like enthusiastic about trying to find help and support, and I was depressed. I just wanted to sit in that for a moment and just remember and miss my son and just cry about the loss that I had. And that's how I wanted to heal at that moment. I didn't want to just move on, and I know you don't want to either, and you don't have to. That's why I founded Still June. Still June is born from the legacy of my son. He was stillborn, born in June. And also, June is a place that I still hold dear to me, because that is my connection with him. And in Still June, it is a sanctuary for advocacy, community, and healing for mothers who are navigating through stillbirth, just like I was. My goal with Still June is to help mothers walk through this process and come out on the other side, not forgetting their child or forgetting what happened, because that's not what needs to happen. Remember your child, honor your child, create a legacy for your child. And also, I want to educate employers on how they should communicate and react when a woman comes back to work and has had a stillbirth. My employer did not care. They wanted me to return to work. That's all they cared about. That's not the approach that someone should have when someone has lost a child. And also, I want to educate hospitals and doctors on how to help women process at the hospital, how to treat women at the hospital. You can't just put them with other women who have had live births. You can't just shove them out the door and act like it never happened and just help them let them figure it out on their own, or just give them a brochure and say, here you go, deal with it, move on. That's not how it happens, and that's not how things work internally. People need help. People need to know that they're supported, and that's my goal with Still June, to support women who are navigating stillbirth, to educate those around them so that the women feel supported, and that this is something that we can all talk about. It could be something that we can educate younger women on, on the signs of warning signs, things that could possibly lead to stillbirth, signs that they need to take care of themselves better, educating them that this could happen, and it could happen for no reason at all. But when you know about things, you are prepared for them, and no one should have to be prepared for a stillbirth, but it does happen, and people should be educated on it and should learn more about it so that they are aware that this is something that is reoccurring continuously throughout the world. And the numbers are not going down, they are peaking. And that's something that we need to work on to make a difference. And that's my goal with Still June. If you are watching this video right now and you have experienced a stillbirth currently or in the past, and you're still suffering in silence, know that you're not broken. You're grieving, and I see you. I'm here.